So, guys, I want to talk about the episode of the Boondocks. It's a Huey Freeman Christmas, and I want to talk about another huge theme that I see within this episode is whitewashing, and definitely there's a lot of whitewashing in the education system. And for those who don't know, that in this episode, Huey Freeman puts on a play called "The Adventures of Black Jesus," and what happens is that his principal tells him that he is not allowed to have Jesus be black. He has to be white, or he has to be Italian or something like that. And it's actually interesting that his teacher said Jesus has to be Italian because what most people don't know is that the depiction of Jesus Christ, the images that you see very commonly, was actually a friend of Leonardo da Vinci. That Leonardo da Vinci painted the most famous image of Jesus Christ, and it happened to be a friend of Leonardo da Vinci to model after Jesus Christ. And and definitely because of whitewashing, the idea of Jesus Christ being African American or looking like Isaac Hayes, they don't want to have that because it creates that system of blacks are superior, whites are inferior because like millennial goes, it was the minority races were inferior to the white races, and it changed over time. But but the idea behind it is really just like how in public schools and a lot of other institutions they want whitewashing, and then also too, like, his teacher gets fired, and as he said, you'll be fired for being an irresponsible white person. And I also like think that it's just another way of saying that obviously there is a status quo, and obviously you won't be directly fired, you will be indirectly fired. That usually happens. And also, like, with school systems are run by governments, so definitely there is politics, and there is always as we kind of say, like, they'll fire you indirectly because of politics, or they'll keep you indirectly. I've worked in state government, so I've had a state job, so I understand, like, it's very political. And then the other thing that I do like about the ending of the episode is the teacher ends up working at a college. So I honestly think that it's a good, hopeful message to say that if you fight against whitewashing, that ultimately, what, things can work out for you. But I think that also it talks a little bit about the education system. That usually colleges are very, very progressive. And usually, if a student is outraged by a racial injustice, they're going to go to the popular side. And obviously, the teacher teaching black culture because he's into it, he's that's going to be more celebrated. Or even if something happens where his teacher's fired and that's in the papers, and then he explains the situation to his students, then they're gonna be like, what, you're for the black cause. And that happens to a lot of teachers in college where they're celebrated for being advocates of diversity or advocates of bringing light to a history. It was very different for me because I remember, like, how whitewashing has impacted my life. Like, I've kind of, like, would say that when I was in high school, I was deeply bullied by a lot of people growing up. So I was a very prejudiced person. I remember, like, always wanting to write a story about, racial self hate, like that I did not like looking African American and be considered African American because I grew up in mostly white neighborhoods where I was considered a nigger. People assumed that I was a good basketball player and I was a good rapper. And then I also had white parents that I'm biracial. I'm actually 50% white, a quarter black, and also a quarter Native American. But in my parents' eyes, I'm a black kid. I'm my dad's black kid. But obviously, instead of writing about, like, the racial hate and also just the mislabeling of race and whatever, that my parents would, like see my homework, read my homework, and, like, if I ever wrote something like that, they would rip it up and throw it in the trash. Or what, I remember, like, how I went to therapy, and this is in high school, and I remember, like, how my parents were saying, what, all I want to hear out of you when you go to therapy of is, what is it like being a black kid adopted by two gay white parents? Like, what does it mean? What does it mean? And all that type of thing. So there's always, my parents' mentality that I should just be, even my own psychology should just be like, what, my biggest struggle is that people don't like me because I'm black, or because I have gay parents, and then maybe one day I have an epiphany to realize, you know what, it doesn't matter. It's all fun and games. It's all hunky dory that I'm a black kid with mental health issues adopted by two gay people. And it's kind of like very defeating and very hurting, and it's also like a killer of passion, really, because I think like what James Baldwin said in Devil Finds Work, there's plenty of black writers and black authors and black actors, and that's also across the diaspora, across all groups and all races of people that don't that give up being give up on storytelling in film or other industries or in schools or in literature or whatever because they grow up with whitewashing. And as James Baldwin was saying, that media and storytelling through film and writing would be hundreds of years in the future if there wasn't whitewashing or a system that destroyed you. And I would even talk about my college experience that I remember like my senior thesis professor, Tyrone Shaw, who is a racist, and Tony Whedon, who is a racist. I'm going to use their names because they caused me so much pain. Johnson State College, now Northern University in Upper Vermont. Like I remember like how my professor Tony Whedon would say, you know what, Byron, why don't you write about being a black man in America? Why don't you write about being black? And he also assumed that I had Asperger's syndrome when I didn't. And I also had a professor, Tyrone Shaw, who was a racist, because he would also say those things too. Why don't you write about being a black man? Why don't you write about what it's like to be a black man with during the time of Barack Obama? And I remember like how when I wrote my senior thesis, I was talking about, again, having self-hate because of my racial identity. Also talking about like how my parents were not what's the word I should say, not abusive, but very just emotionally inappropriate. Like I was like talking about like how one time I was roughhousing with my brother. My brother would do things like tickle me or hit me or beat me up sometimes. So one time I took a small miniature bat, and I just like tapped him on the head really, really hard. And my dad saw that, so he was trashing the house. He was throwing kitchen knives. He was throwing like cupboards, knocking over things. And he grabbed the vacuum cleaner and he was threatening to swing it at my head to teach me to understand that, you know, we don't take violence too far. And then he kicked me out of the house for a few hours. And then he let me back in. And he kind of said that, you know what, it's your fault that I reacted that way. He didn't want to. And the point of that story is that after that, me and my other father, Kevin, we were both hanging out with each other, like, because he wanted to. He said, like, you know what, kicking him out. No, I'm just gonna like take him out for a couple of hours. And me and Kevin were just like talking, and I was gonna write a chapter about like how that was the time where I felt like I could have talked to Kevin about what it's like, because he asked me questions about like what do you think it's like to have gay parents and other things like that. It's weird that sometimes when a bad thing happens, that sometimes that's when my family actually kind of talks about serious shit or brings up these kind of like these questions we never ask. But I remember like how my professor didn't want to hear that because he kind of felt that was too sad, that was too bad of a story. And ultimately it kind of went into, you know, that type of thing too of, well, Byron, you have gay white parents that love you. You can't talk about any bad thing that they've done. It has to be, you know what, I'm black. My biological mother had mental health issues and was abusive. And I was adopted by two gay white men who raised me not to behave like a nigger. In other words, not one of those black men that go around shooting up the neighborhood or rapping or whatever. You know, like I was domesticated by whites. And that's kind of like the generation I grew up in. Like I think like after like 2016, there's been more of an influx to tell different stories. But I did grow up in time of extreme whitewashing. Byron is black. Byron has mental health issues. Byron's mother was crazy and had problems. Let's forget the fact that that his biological father was white. Let's talk about how he has gay parents, and let's make him write a story that black is beautiful. And it's great that he's a black kid in the time of Barack Obama. That's what all my white professors wanted to hear. And I remember, like, you know, when I wrote my paper and I presented a chapter of my life as my senior thesis, like, and I remember like, just walking out of it, and my professor was kind of like, a little surprised that I did that. But I remember like throwing my paper in the trash, ripping it up after that. And my dad and my other people were telling me, I mean, I didn't do it in front of anybody. Nobody saw that, but I didn't. I remember like my dad and other people saying, just do it for the class. But usually I like what Huey did, which is what you do when you deal with whitewashing is you walk out, you drop out of the class, you go off and do your own thing. You don't like sit there and you eat crow. But I was naive at the time. I was kind of very depressed, didn't have a lot of self-esteem, didn't like have a lot of gut. So I went off. And also my professor was super busy that semester. So he kind of just wanted just an easy ride. The easy ride with Byron is he's a black kid, and he's going to write the story about what is it like to be a black kid with mental health issues with two gay men adopting him, and he aspires to be Barack Obama because that's all we see black people in the 2010s, or people of color or biracial people, that they're all black and they aspire to be Barack Obama, and if they're helped by a white person, let's celebrate it. So this episode definitely is a precautionary tale of whitewashing. And ultimately, do what Huey did. He stood up for himself. He walked out. And even though like people did not pay attention to his accomplishment, because most people didn't attend, they protested. That all that stuff happens. There has to be more fighting for the vision that you want. And this episode, I think, definitely encapsulates that. You may not get the acclaim that you want, but fighting the battle is more important, because the battle's not been fought for such a long time. So tell your vision. Don't allow whitewashing to happen. And if you're in college and you deal with shit like that, use social media platforms to talk about it, and make sure people understand that a good teacher, a good professor makes you better at the story you're trying to tell, not a narrative, which is that black people need to tell stories where they've been uplifted by white people, and that black people nowadays need to kind of be the ass kisser, need to kiss Barack Obama's ass. And that also, if you're biracial like me, not even a quarter black, you're a 100% a black person because of white supremacy in America.